Hello, and welcome to Learning Access 2013. My name is Mike Henry, and this is going to be the first video from Tutorial 3. In this video, we are going to set up a query. So we're going to learn the basics to setting up a query. In that process, we're going to understand first our tables and the relationships and what that means to us as we set up a query. We'll look at vocabulary, and then we're going to understand the concept of view versus run. So one of the things that you want to do before setting up a query is understand your database. Understand the relationships between the tables and the common fields between the tables that are going to get you the data that you want. So real quickly here, I'm going to open up our relationships here, and you're going to see that we have a patient table. In there we have a primary key of the patient ID, and we can see that that's being used as a foreign key in the visit table, and that's giving us patients the ability to have multiple visits. From there we can see that a visit could have multiple billings according to that visit. And in our billing table we have a line item called invoice item. Now this is some type of billing code, but we don't know based on the code what is being billed. So we have a support table now that you can see, the invoice item, which will support that. And if we open up that table, you can see that if someone gets billed for a DG119, that means they had some lab work done. So we're going to be able to look straight through these and quickly understand where our data is coming from. If I'm asking questions about the patient, I want to get information from the patient table. If I'm asking about invoicing, obviously I'm pulling on this table over here in billing. So now that you understand where your data is coming from, you now can begin to set up your queries. So we're going to set up a query now, and in this section I will be teaching you how to use query design. I will not be using the query wizard. The reason why is if you do not get the query set up properly in the query wizard, if you don't understand how to do editing behind the scenes, your only choice is to delete that query and do a do-over. So I want you to understand how to use query design and be able to edit a query when needed. So we're going to click right here, and you'll see that I have all my tables that I can pull from. And because we're going to pull a query which is just patient information, we're going to pull from one table only, and that'll be this one, the patient table. And when I double click that, that puts that up here. And then I'm going to close this window real quickly. So I hit close. I'm going to close my access objects here, so we're going to focus just in on what's on our particular table. Now up here you can see these are the available fields that we're allowed to ask questions on, or we're allowed to query. Down here you can see this area looks like a grid, and this is called the design grid. This is where we're going to put the fields that we're going to be asking questions on. So when I put my information down here, this is what we call query by example, QBE, query by example. We're going to give the big database God in the sky an example of what we want. So right here I have the choice, and I'm going to show you multiple ways to bring data into a query. Here I am in the field section, and if I wanted to put in here patient's last name, I could click here and drop down to last name. So if you're a mouse kind of person, you might decide to do that. I'm moving my hand onto the keyboard and I hit the tab key, and you notice I've moved over one, and I could instead, I'm going to click on the F, and you see immediately that that brings up a field that starts with an F, so I could do the first name. So I could use my keyboard to do this. I can also hit the tab key. I've moved over one and I'm looking to set my next one up. This one's going to be city. Now I could come up here and grab city, and then I could drag city all the way down and drop city into here. You can see that that's another way to put data in. Or the way that you're going to probably see me use the most this rest of these videos, we'll be clicking right here for phone with a double click, and you see that that appears right down there. And while we're here, we might as well throw in the email address. So I've got these fields here, and I want to look at my results. You'll see that I have two choices. I can do a view or I can do a run. If I view this, you can see I come down to my data view, and I am viewing this. In here I have 51 records. You can see I've got 51 records here, and I've got this information in this way. Now I'm just going to click back here to go to my design view, and I'm going to click Run. And what you're going to see is I've got this information just this way, and I've got 51 records. So for right now, there's no difference between a view or a run. And that's because this is a select query. That means we're just selecting data and looking at that data. If we were to run any type of action query, like make a table, append, update, or crosstabs, these are all action queries. These would require us to run it to actually have something happen. So for what we're going to do this semester setting things up, we are just going to simply click on the view. So in this video we set up our first query. Before we ever hit the query design button to create it, we went and looked at our tables. We understood that we have patients. Patients could have multiple visits, that we could have multiple invoices being billed against those visits, and that we saw a support table that was supporting what an invoice item could actually be instead of just a number. Then what we did is we set up our query. We learned that we have the tables that we can pick from. We also learned that we have the design grid down below, and that we are creating a QBE, query by example. So we learned a lot of vocabulary terms in here. We saw multiple different ways to move our fields from the top into the design grid, and then afterwards we looked at what a view versus a run is, and found out that with a select query, the kind of query we're running, it doesn't matter. A view and a run actually produces the same thing. It's only later on if we do an action query that we actually run those, because those will create an action